Some nights begin quietly, so quietly that you don't realize your entire life is about to split into two halves, the life before, and the life after. And Naomi never imagined that the night of her 25th wedding anniversary, the night she thought would close one chapter with celebration, would instead tear the world open beneath her feet with a quiet cruelty she never saw coming. The Watergate ballroom shimmered with lights, polished glass, and conversations floating like champagne bubbles. Naomi moved gracefully through the guests, smiling softly, her navy silk dress catching the glimmer of chandeliers. She was nervous in an almost tender way, not because of the crowd, but because 25 years of marriage was a strange, bittersweet milestone. It held all their sacrifices, victories, disappointments, and compromises in a single number. Behind the soft music and polite laughter, Naomi carried memories like folded letters, their first apartment, college days, the nights crying over infertility, the mornings making peace with childlessness, the holidays with Celeste's cold stares. All of it alive behind her gentle smile. Darren stood across the room, tuxedo pressed, posture straight, raising glasses with colleagues. He looked different, too excited, too polished, too rehearsed. Naomi watched him, trying to read his expression as she had done for decades, but something felt out of place tonight, something she couldn't yet name. She pressed her hand over her heart to calm the strange flutter beneath her ribs. 3 weeks earlier she had woken at 3 a.m. to a whisper behind their bedroom door, a whisper she was never meant to hear. She remembered that night vividly, the creak of the hardwood floor, the faint glow under the door, and Darren's hushed voice saying, "She won't suspect a thing, Mom, after the anniversary, it will all be clean." She froze, barely breathing. His mother's voice flowed through the speaker, smooth, deliberate, approving, "Good. Do it in public. She won't fight back in front of people." Naomi had lain there, still as stone, staring into the dark. She had swallowed the rising fear, pressing her fist against her lips to trap the sound of her own heartbeat. Something inside her had cracked that night. Not loudly, but quietly, like the first break in thin ice before it shatters. Since then nothing had felt normal. Darren's sudden affection, his overly enthusiastic plans for a grand celebration, his calendar reminders to call someone named S, his locked computer, his lies about a colleague from Seattle, all of it drifted through her mind tonight like unwelcome ghosts. And now, standing amidst the music and warm lights of their anniversary celebration, Naomi felt that same crack widening under her feet. Guests congratulated them, clinking glasses, saying, "A love like yours is rare," and Naomi nodded with the soft smile of someone who didn't want to ruin their illusions. That's the strange burden of betrayal. The betrayed often protects everyone except themselves. At the center table, Celeste Price, immaculate pearl earrings, silver hair pinned high, posture rigid, smiled with a satisfaction that made Naomi's stomach tighten. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't pride. It was anticipation. Naomi turned away. The host tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Mr. Darren Price would like to share a few words on this special occasion." Naomi felt something cold slide down her spine. Darren stepped to the center. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and smiled too widely. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. 25 years, what a journey." A wave of applause drifted across the room. Naomi folded her hands in her lap. Darren continued, "When we marry young, we believe love is enough. But life teaches us truths we don't see at first. It teaches us that people change, dreams split, and sometimes," his voice hardened, "sometimes we realize we made mistakes." The room stilled. A subtle confusion spread. Guests exchanged glances. Naomi felt her pulse throb behind her ears. Darren scanned the room and breathed dramatically. "Tonight, I want honesty. Naomi and we're no longer aligned. I've tolerated a life that wasn't right for me. I stayed because it was comfortable, but comfort isn't happiness." Woman gasped. Darren's next words hit like a blade wrapped in velvet. "I'm ending our marriage. We're divorcing." The room exhaled in shock. Someone dropped a glass. Naomi's breath caught. Even though she had suspected something was coming, nothing prepares you for the moment your life collapses under chandeliers. Darren pushed further, emboldened by the silence. "Naomi will receive what the law allows, but she must leave the condo. I deserve a new beginning, with someone who fits the life I've built." His eyes flicked toward a corner. Naomi followed the glance, and there she saw her. A young blonde woman in an expensive dress, smiling faintly, lifting a glass as if she were already celebrating her victory. Sierra, the mistress. Naomi's fingers curled under the tablecloth. She inhaled deeply, steadying her heartbeat. The humiliation was so sharp she tasted metal. But beneath the pain, something else stirred, a quiet, rising force she did not yet name. The room buzzed with whispers. Celeste dabbed her lips with a napkin, trying to hide her satisfied smirk. And in that moment Naomi stood. Her chair slid back with a soft, decisive sound. The room fell silent. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she approached Darren. He looked startled. He had expected tears, a collapse, a plea. Not this. Naomi gently took the microphone from his hand. Her voice was calm, steady, almost serene. Thank you, Darren. That was honest. She paused. I think it's time I tell the truth too. Murmurs spread like ripples. Naomi opened her purse and pulled out a thick folder, the folder she had built piece by piece over the last 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, I found out about your affair, your lawyer, your plans, your attempt to take the condo my parents bought for me before we married. She looked directly at Celeste. And your mother's role in encouraging you. Celeste's smile died instantly. Naomi continued, voice unwavering. You see, I checked the records. Legally, the condo is mine. A premarital asset. You cannot take what was never yours. A gasp passed through the room. Darren's confidence shattered visibly. Naomi lifted another document. And regarding our finances, every dollar you spend on Sierra, the jewelry, the hotels, the business trips, all paid from our joint account. I have the statements. Sierra stiffened. And one more thing, Naomi said softly, her voice carrying like silk over stone. I received an inheritance last month. 2 properties and over $1 million. Meaning I do not need anything from you. Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. Naomi lowered the microphone. So yes, Darren, you may have your new beginning, but not at my expense. She placed the microphone on the table gently and walked toward the exit with calm steps. And although the ballroom erupted behind her, shouts, accusations, collapsing secrets, Naomi felt something inside her open, like a door to a world she had forgotten she could enter. Freedom doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it slips in quietly, disguised as the echo of doors closing behind you. As Naomi stepped out of the Watergate ballroom and into the cool night air, she felt as though she had walked out of her old skin. The chaos still roared behind the glass walls, guests shouting, Sierra crying, Celeste accusing, Darren stumbling through excuses, but none of it touched her anymore. For the first time in 25 years, the night belonged entirely to her. She took a long breath, feeling the air settle inside her lungs like a promise she had never allowed herself before. There was no trembling, no regret, no ache begging to be soothed. Only clarity, sharp, cold, liberating. The taxi ride home felt unreal, almost cinematic. The streets glided by in ribbons of gold and shadow, and Naomi watched them with an odd detachment, as if she were watching someone else's life through a window. The driver glanced at her occasionally through the mirror, sensing something heavy in the silence. Rough night, he asked gently. Naomi offered a soft smile. A long time coming. The driver nodded knowingly, not pressing for details. Some stories are too personal to fit into small talk. When they reached her building, she stepped out with a strange lightness, like someone learning how to walk again. Inside the condo, she locked the door, leaned against it, and allowed the quiet to wash over her. She didn't cry. The tears had burned out weeks ago, in whispered nights when she first realized Darren was plotting her downfall. Instead, she moved with intention. She hung her purse on the hook, placed the folder on the table, and took off her heels. The floor felt grounding beneath her feet. She walked to the balcony and opened the glass doors. A breeze rustled through the curtains, carrying the faint scent of night-blooming jasmine. She closed her eyes and let it touch her face. Somewhere deep inside her, a truth whispered, "You survived." The next morning sunlight spilled across the condo, soft and warm. Naomi made herself coffee, not because she needed it, but because the simple act felt like an affirmation. She sipped it slowly, watching dust particles dance in the light. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, Celeste stood there, still wearing last night's outfit, hair slightly messy, her lipstick smudged. Her eyes were cold, furious. "How dare you humiliate my son like that?" she hissed. "In front of everyone?" Naomi didn't flinch. "You taught him everything he did tonight," she replied calmly. "I simply told the truth." Celeste's face twisted. "You won't get away with this. Darren will." "Will what?" Naomi asked, lifting an eyebrow. "Lose his job. Lose his mistress? Lose the money he stole? All of that is already happening." For the first time in 25 years, Celeste was speechless. Naomi stepped back and gently closed the door in her face. By noon, 3 voicemails from Darren filled her phone, his voice trembling, asking to talk, to fix things, to explain. Naomi deleted them without listening past the first 10 seconds. She had no room left inside her for lies or excuses. Her day unfolded in quiet strength. She reviewed the inheritance documents, organized the papers from Mr. Perry regarding the condo, and transferred the last of her share of the joint funds to her private account. She opened a blank notebook and wrote a single sentence. "My life begins now." Then she called Aisha. "You did it," Aisha said, pride warm in her voice. "Are you safe?" "I'm more than safe," Naomi replied. "I'm free." They met that evening at a small cafe near the harbor. The sun dipped behind the buildings, casting long golden reflections across the water. Naomi sat with her back straight, her voice steady, recounting everything that had happened after she left the ballroom, the shouting, the collapse, the new silence she found. Aisha listened carefully, then said, "Now we prepare. Darren will try to fight back." "He can try," Naomi replied, fingers tightening around her cup. "But I have every document, every proof. And I'm not afraid anymore." "You shouldn't be," Aisha said. "You already won." On her way home, Naomi walked along the harbor, watching the boats sway gently in the water. She realized something unexpected. She wasn't angry anymore. She felt detached, almost peaceful. She had spent so many years shrinking parts of herself to fit a life that no longer belonged to her. And now, with the past unraveling behind her, she felt space growing inside her chest, space for something new. But the world wasn't done with her yet. That night, as she sat reviewing translations for the publishing company she had dreamt of for years, her phone buzzed again, not Darren this time, but Candace. Her best friend's voice sounded frantic. "Naomi, the video is everywhere. Someone recorded Darren's speech. And your response. It's viral." Naomi blinked. "Viral?" "Yes. People are posting it on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, calling you the anniversary queen. They're saying you handled betrayal with more grace than a movie heroine. Naomi, the internet is in love with you." Naomi leaned back into her chair, stunned. "I didn't intend for any of that." "I know," Candace said, "but sometimes life writes scenes better than screenwriters." The next morning confirmed everything. Her inbox was flooded, interview requests, supportive messages, strangers thanking her for giving them courage. Women wrote about their own silent battles. Men apologized on behalf of husbands who never learned kindness. Even her coworkers sent messages admiring her strength. But not all messages were warm. At 2:14 p.m., Darren sent another email. A long one. Apologetic. Desperate. Confused. Begging for a chance to talk. Naomi read halfway before closing it. She tapped her fingers on the desk, thinking. Then she replied with a single line. "Please direct all future communication through my attorney." And just like that, she cut the last thread binding her to the man she once loved. Days passed. Naomi attended meetings, approved manuscripts, adjusted budgets, and slowly, quietly, the weight of the past loosened its grip. She found herself laughing more, softly at first, then fully. She slept deeply. She took walks on the beach. She stood at the balcony at night and let the wind brush her hair like a gentle reassurance that she was still here, still whole. But even in this newfound peace, something stirred inside her, a tremor of anticipation, a whisper that said the journey wasn't over. Because freedom is not the end of a story. It is only the beginning. And Naomi's beginning was about to lead her somewhere unexpected, a place where healing and destiny would cross paths in ways she never imagined. There are chapters in life that begin quietly, almost like a whisper crossing a room you haven't entered yet. And Naomi felt that whisper following her in the weeks after the anniversary, a gentle, persistent tug at the edge of her new beginning. The storm was over, but the air still carried a strange electricity, as if the universe was clearing space for something she wasn't yet ready to see. She spent her mornings in Miami wrapped in the soft gold light pouring through the balcony windows, her afternoons immersed in manuscripts, and her evenings walking barefoot along the shoreline where each wave pressed cool reassurance against her ankles. Life had slowed, softened, deepened. Yet beneath this calm, a new energy flowed like a rising tide. News of the anniversary incident spread far beyond what Naomi expected. Her inbox filled with messages from strangers thanking her for standing tall, being dignified, teaching the world how to walk away with power. Journalists reached out with interview requests, influencers made reaction videos, and countless women sent messages saying her courage had helped them leave toxic marriages. Naomi didn't chase the attention, she simply acknowledged it and quietly returned to her work. But the world was watching her now, and she carried that responsibility with a strange, quiet grace. One morning, while reviewing a German manuscript for her publishing line, her doorbell rang. When she opened it, Darren stood there, looking nothing like the man she married, or the man who betrayed her. His eyes were sunken, his shoulders slouched, and his voice cracked when he spoke. "Naomi, please, just a minute." She hesitated, not from fear but from the echo of old memories. Finally, she stepped onto the hallway but kept the door partly closed behind her. Darren swallowed hard. "I lost my job." Naomi nodded once. "I know." He blinked, startled. "You know? Your meltdown at the party was recorded by at least a dozen people," she said softly. "Your CEO saw it. It was unavoidable." He rubbed his face with trembling hands. "Everything fell apart. Sierra left me. Mom is furious. I don't know what to do. For the first time, Naomi saw him not as the man who hurt her, but simply as a man who had ruined himself. Yet she felt no satisfaction in his downfall, nor pity, only clarity. You chose this path, she said gently, and now you're facing the consequences. Can't we talk? He pleaded. Not to fix anything, just to talk? Naomi shook her head, her voice steady. I'm not the person you talk to anymore. Darren exhaled shakily, nodding as if he had expected that answer. He stepped back, tears shining in his eyes. I'm sorry for everything. I know, Naomi replied, but sorry doesn't rebuild a lifetime. She closed the door softly, not with anger, but with finality. As the lock clicked, she felt a chapter seal itself permanently. Darren's shadow no longer reached her, his presence no longer echoed inside her. She walked to the balcony, inhaled the ocean air, and whispered, "Let me move forward." Later that afternoon, Naomi met Aisha for their weekly coffee at a small outdoor cafe. Aisha looked at her closely, noticing the calm in Naomi's posture. You look different, she said, sipping her latte. Like someone who has finally stepped into their own story. Naomi smiled. Maybe I have. And maybe, Aisha added with a teasing grin, it's time to let someone new into that story. Naomi laughed softly. Aisha, please. Romance is the last thing on my mind. That's exactly when it shows up, Aisha said with a wink. Naomi shook her head fondly and changed the subject. But Aisha's words lingered in her mind long after she returned home. She wasn't looking for love, she was looking for herself. Yet she couldn't deny it. Something inside her felt open, not searching, but receptive. The next day, Naomi boarded a flight to Berlin for a European literature conference where she had been invited as a special guest. As the plane glided over the Atlantic, she gazed at the endless stretch of sky and felt something shift inside her, a sense that she was crossing not just an ocean but a threshold. Berlin greeted her with crisp air and the soft rumble of trams echoing through its ancient streets. The hotel room overlooked a street lined with cafes and bookstores, and Naomi felt instantly at home. She spent the evening walking through narrow alleys, absorbing the quiet poetry of old brick walls and soft lantern lights. At the conference the next morning, Naomi delivered a speech about the art of translation, how it wasn't just about language, but about carrying the soul of a story from one world into another. Her voice was calm but powerful, and the audience listened with rapt attention. When she finished, the applause filled the hall like warm rain. As she stepped off the stage, a man approached her, tall, warm-eyed, with a gentle smile that didn't feel forced or hungry. Mrs. Sterling, he asked politely. I'm Dr. Daniel Carter. I teach comparative literature at Boston University. I've followed your work for years. Naomi extended her hand. A pleasure to meet you, Dr. Carter. Please, he said with a shy chuckle. Call me Daniel. They spoke briefly, but something about him lingered in Naomi's thoughts. The way he listened, the way he kept his hands lightly folded as if careful not to intrude on her space, the way he asked about her publishing house with genuine curiosity instead of professional ambition. Later that evening, Naomi found herself sitting alone at a small cafe near the Berlin Cathedral when Daniel appeared at her table holding 2 cups of tea. Mint, he said. The waiter said it's the best here. Naomi smiled, surprised by how natural his presence felt. They talked for hours about literature, about cities they loved, about music, about how stories shape the world. He didn't ask about her past. He didn't pry. He simply shared the moment with her. As they walked out into the cool night, Daniel paused near the bridge. You have a quiet strength about you, he said gently. It's rare. Naomi lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. Compliments had always felt like traps with Darren, but Daniel's tone held no agenda, only truth. When she returned to her hotel room, she sat on the edge of the bed, her heart calm yet awake, like a book opening to a page she didn't realize she had bookmarked long ago. She wasn't falling for anyone. Not yet. But something inside her had shifted, a soft, hesitant warmth she hadn't felt in years. Maybe Aisha had been right. Maybe new stories begin when the old ones are truly finished. Back in Miami days later, Naomi resumed her routine, but Daniel's presence lingered like a gentle echo. Their conversations continued by email, thoughtful, easy, unforced. He never pushed. He never asked for more. And Naomi found herself waiting for his messages with quiet anticipation. The past wasn't chasing her anymore. The future was approaching her instead. But even as new possibilities unfolded, fate had one more storm to throw her way, a final test she never expected, from someone she thought she had left behind forever. Sometimes life tests us not when we are broken, but when we have finally begun to heal, as if the universe wants to see whether our new strength is real or only borrowed from temporary hope. Naomi learned this on a warm Tuesday afternoon when the past, which she thought she had buried beneath the calm rhythm of the ocean and the soft glow of her new life, suddenly returned with a force sharp enough to remind her that some storms don't die quietly. Miami was peaceful that week. Naomi's publishing house was flourishing, Her translators delivered beautiful work, and emails from Daniel had become a soft constant in her days, thoughtful lines that made her smile without effort. She wasn't rushing anything, but she couldn't deny the steady warmth growing between them. Their conversations stretched from translation theories to childhood memories, from Berlin cafes to favorite novels, from music to quiet dreams they hadn't shared with anyone in years. It felt natural, unforced, almost like discovering a forgotten part of herself. But before her heart could fully lean toward this new beginning, life tugged at her sleeve with a reminder: healing demands courage, not escape. It happened on a day bright enough to make the ocean sparkle like cut glass. Naomi left her office and walked toward her car, a soft breeze brushing her hair. She had just unlocked the door when she heard hurried footsteps behind her. A voice called her name, sharp, familiar, breathless. Naomi, wait. She turned. Celeste stood there. But this was not the poised, icy woman Naomi had known for 25 years. This Celeste looked disheveled, her hair undone, her expression shaken, her expensive clothes wrinkled as if she had spent hours pacing or crying. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse tightly to her chest. Please, Celeste said, voice cracking. I need your help. Naomi blinked. My help? Yes, Celeste whispered, stepping closer. It's Darren. Something's wrong. Terribly wrong. Naomi felt a strange tightening in her throat. Not fear, but a complicated knot of old wounds and reluctant empathy. What happened? Celeste's voice was shaky, barely holding itself together. He's been fired from 2 temporary jobs. He's drowning in debt. He barely sleeps. He hardly eats. He's lost everything. And now I found a letter on his desk. Goodbye. Letter, I think. Her voice broke. I think he might hurt himself. Naomi exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the words settle. For all the pain Darren caused, she never wanted him destroyed. She never wanted him broken. She never wished for his suffering, only for her freedom. Where is he now? Naomi asked quietly. At my apartment, Celeste whispered. He won't answer the door. He won't speak to me. Please, Naomi. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but you're the only person he ever listened to. If there's anyone left who can reach him, it's you. Naomi felt a swirl of emotions, anger, sorrow, exhaustion, compassion. But above all, she felt responsibility, not to Darren, but to herself. She would not allow her story to end in bitterness. She would not let another human being collapse while she stood by and watched. I'll come, she said. Celeste's shoulders sagged in fragile relief as she led Naomi out of the parking lot, into her car, and toward her small apartment across town. The drive was silent, heavy with unspoken regrets. Naomi watched Celeste gripping the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale. You know, Celeste whispered suddenly, you were always kinder to him than he deserved. Kinder than I ever was. Naomi didn't respond. Some truths don't need confirmation. When they arrived, Celeste fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. The apartment smelled faintly of old furniture and lavender air freshener. Inside, the living room was dim, blinds half closed. Papers littered the table, unpaid bills, job rejections, unopened letters, and in the center, a folded sheet Naomi recognized immediately. The goodbye letter. Her chest tightened. Darren? Celeste called out softly. Darren, sweetie, someone is here to see you. No answer. Celeste pushed open the bedroom door slowly. Darren sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped, hands limp between his knees, staring at the floor with empty eyes. He looked thinner, fragile, almost ghost-like. When he finally lifted his head and saw Naomi, something inside him flickered. Shame, grief, disbelief, all tangled together. You came, he whispered. Naomi stepped inside, the air heavy around her. Your mother was worried. Darren let out a shaky laugh, a bitter, hollow sound. Worried? Should have worried 25 years ago. He rubbed his face with trembling hands. You saw the mess, didn't you? The whole world saw. I ruined everything. I ruined myself. I ruined you. Naomi sat in the chair across from him, her voice steady but gentle. You didn't ruin me, Darren. You hurt me, but I rebuilt. He swallowed hard. How? How did you survive what I did? By choosing myself, she said quietly. By deciding I wouldn't let your choices define the rest of my life. Tears welled in Darren's eyes. I thought leaving you would make my life better. I thought Sierra meant freedom. I thought you were holding me back, but I was wrong. I see it now. You were the only good thing in my life, and I threw it away. Naomi felt the heaviness of his words, not as validation, not as revenge, but as truth too late to change anything. You can still fix your life, Naomi said, but not by clinging to the past, not by drowning in guilt. You need help, real help. Darren covered his face. I don't deserve help. Not, Naomi replied softly. You need it anyway. For a long moment, the room held nothing but quiet breathing. Then Darren lowered his hands, eyes red, voice trembling. Sorry, Naomi. Truly, I'm sorry for everything. Naomi nodded slowly. And I hope someday you forgive yourself too. He broke into quiet sobs, not dramatic, not manipulative, but the raw crying of a man whose world had finally collapsed in on him. Naomi stood, touched Celeste's shoulder gently, and whispered, "He needs professional support. Call someone. Don't let him be alone." Celeste nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Naomi walked out of the apartment into the warm Miami air, the sun setting in streaks of orange across the horizon. She inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the moment settle inside her. She didn't feel guilt. She didn't feel victory. She felt closure. Complete, final closure. Her past no longer controlled her, and her compassion did not tether her to suffering. Helping Darren wasn't returning to him, it was releasing him, and releasing herself. That night, as she sat on her balcony with the ocean breeze brushing her face, her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Just checking in. How is your heart today?" Naomi smiled softly, realizing something profound. Her past had come full circle, and now her future was finally knocking. Hidden closing hook. But destiny wasn't done shaping her path, because the next choice she made would become the turning point of her entire new life. The ocean had a way of keeping secrets and telling truths. Naomi learned to listen to both, and by the time spring folded into summer she found the shoreline answering her impatient, honest waves. Naomi's life after the ballroom unfolded like a novel she had finally been allowed to write on her own pages, not a hasty retelling, but a patient, exacting draft filled with small rituals, careful choices, and the steady work of building something that could not be undermined by other people's cowardice. The publishing house grew in the way a garden grows when tended, first one translator, then two, then a steady core of young voices who trusted her with their first fragile manuscripts. She signed checks with the same calm that had once arranged the household bills, now confident and deliberate rather than apologetic. Invitations came, a radio interview, a feature in a literary magazine, a modest but sincere prize nomination for a translated collection she championed. Naomi accepted some things and refused others. The world had offered her attention, and she learned to receive it on her terms, grateful, but never hungry for it. She rented a small, sunlit office with tall windows and left a bedside lamp in her Miami condo that she turned on each morning just to remind herself that daybreak belonged to her. Daniel and she met in unhurried arcs. A lunch after a conference, a rainy walk beneath shared umbrellas, an argument about a poet neither could agree on, then an apology and the kind of laugh that loosens a person's shoulders. He never rushed her, never asked for the past as a toll for the present. He arrived with patient curiosity and a bookshelf full of references he'd never used to impress her, only to share. Their evenings were quiet at first, long talks over indifferent takeout, visits to small bookstores where Naomi picked out brittle volume translations and read to him in the way people read to comfort themselves, and gradually those evenings stretched into plans for panels together. And then to afternoons at the publishing house where Daniel would sit quietly in the corner, grading proofs and smiling in that private way that said he believed in her work as much as he believed in her. Naomi discovered that love after loss has a different architecture. It is built on foundations of mutual respect, safety, and laughter that does not demand repayment. She did not forget the sting of betrayal, but she did learn how to tuck it into a drawer of life lessons and close it without locking it away forever. Business grew alongside her new life. She hired a small team, paid fair wages, and set up a modest fellowship for promising translators under 35, a living honor to Aunt Josephine, whose unexpected legacy had become the literal seed of Naomi's rebirth. The fellowship was announced at a little event that felt like the opposite of the Watergate spectacle. No chandeliers, no show, only folding chairs, coffee, and readers leaning forward to hear the launch speech of a woman who had chosen to lift others rather than settle scores. Naomi spoke plainly that day about translation as compromise and fidelity, about the strange joy of carrying someone else's voice into another tongue, and afterwards women approached her with tearful thanks, men shook her hand with sober respect, and a young translator from Lisbon gave her a folded card that read, "For the woman who taught us how to leave and how to come back alive." She kept the card in her wallet for months, like a compass. Darren's spiral continued in the months after the public collapse, less spectacular than Naomi had feared and less melodramatic than people assumed. He lost jobs, his mother sold the mansion and moved to a smaller flat, and the world closed off polite doors that had once opened at his name. He filed for bankruptcy, paid court-ordered debts, and entered therapy after Naomi insisted, through Aisha and with the hospital social worker's gentle nudge, that if he was to rebuild anything he would need professional help. Seeing him take those first awkward steps toward recovery, the first group therapy, the first appointment with a counselor who refused to be impressed, did not soften Naomi's boundaries, but it did complicate her feelings in humane ways she had not been prepared for. She felt pity that was not weakness, relief that he had not harmed himself, and a deep, steady conviction that she would not be responsible for repairing the parts of him he had chosen to break. When he wrote a short letter some months later, not a plea, Only a note that said he was taking responsibility and would continue treatment. Naomi read it once, folded it, and put it in a drawer with the divorce papers. She felt no triumph. She felt closure. Social media spun stories in the aftermath, as it always does. Clips of the anniversary with catchy captions, think pieces about public humiliation and private cruelty, threads that debated who had been the villain and who had been the victim. Naomi watched some of it, occasionally, and mostly ignored the rest. She let the noise exist without letting it live inside her. What mattered more was the quiet mail from readers whose lives she had touched by example, letters from women who left their marriages, men who reached out to apologize to partners, translators who found steady work, small ripples that told her the truth the viral videos never could. Real change happens in slow, stubborn increments. She began hosting monthly meetings at the publishing house for women in transition, inviting legal advisors, therapists, and career coaches to talk about practical steps people could take when collapsing relationships threatened livelihood and dignity. These gatherings were not an act of revenge. They were an act of care. Naomi discovered profound satisfaction in practical kindness, in helping assemble a CV, in coaching a frightened translator through a negotiation, in making sure legal forms were explained and not weaponized. One bright morning in late autumn, Naomi stood at a small stage in a civic center to read from a new anthology of translated essays. She had chosen a passage about second chances, about how people sometimes misread their own courage as luck when chance had nothing to do with it. After her reading, as people lined up for signatures and small talk, a woman approached with a child on her hip and a wide, grateful smile. "You don't know me," she said, voice trembling, "but your speech at the anniversary made me leave before I could be erased." The woman's eyes were wet. Naomi took her hands and felt the surprising heat of shared humanity. These small encounters, these private reverberations, felt more real than any headline. Daniel watched from the back, clapping quietly, and when Naomi later stepped outside the center into the dusk, he was waiting with 2 cups of coffee. "You were quietly fierce," he said without trying to be clever. She laughed, the sound easy and honest, and tucked her hand into his as if testing a seam. Not everything turned gentle. Sierra resurfaced briefly, now allied to a different man and a fresher set of ambitions. She tried once to contact Naomi through a mutual acquaintance with something that read like an apology but smelled faintly of self-protection. Naomi read the message, folded it into the bin, and moved on. Celeste tried, too, in a way that suggested humiliation had not softened her but worn her down. She called one winter day with a voice stripped of pride, asking technical questions about how to access certain papers for her own benefit after the bankruptcy. Naomi answered with bureaucratic courtesy and a calm exactness that felt like a practiced art, brief, precise, and immovable. The world had reduced their enemies to private messes, but Naomi's work was public and constructive. She had no time for spectacle. As the first year after the divorce closed, Naomi traveled occasionally to a conference in Lisbon, a small festival in Prague, a book fair in Buenos Aires, and each time she returned she found the Miami light hitting her living room in new ways, as if the city itself approved of the woman who had come back into herself. Daniel sometimes came with her, sometimes met her after. Their companionship was a comfortable geometry of 2 lives overlapping without smothering. They discussed opening a small bilingual imprint together, a modest project that excited both their professional and private imaginations. Naomi imagined a bookshelf that bore books she loved and people she trusted. She imagined weekends of translation marathons with coffee-spattered edits and the soft hum of a printer in the back room. The morning she received a letter from the German bank confirming the final transfer of Aunt Josephine's accounts into her name, Naomi sat at the balcony and simply watched the sea for a long time. Money, she knew, did not buy happiness, it bought choices. She thought of the apartment on M Street that would always be hers, of the cabin by the lake that Darren kept, of the small investments she would make in the fellowship and in a local literacy program, of the publishing house that would now become a place other people could plant their stories and watch them grow. She wrote Aunt Josephine a long, impossible letter thanking her for the chance she had been given, a letter she could never send, and then she made tea and called Aisha to plan a small celebration with the women who had been at her side from the beginning. One evening, months after the final papers were signed and the last phone calls returned to silence, Naomi walked along the beach with Daniel and paused to look at the horizon. He squeezed her hand and said quietly, "You changed more lives than you probably know." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about the strange alchemy of surviving, how indignity can be turned into an oath of care, how loss can be repurposed into purpose. Naomi had not set out to be anyone's hero, she had simply refused to be a victim. The choice had multiplied into something unexpected and beautiful. Hidden closing hook. As the tide folded distant light into silver, Naomi understood that her life would always carry the echo of that terrible anniversary, but it no longer defined her. Instead, it was the hinge she had used to open a door into a life she had chosen. And behind that door something quietly miraculous was waiting to be built.